Space Coconut.
Okay, so today we're building a budget deck around Magar of the Magic Strings. As usual, we're working with cards under $1 with an exception for exceptional cards in the deck. Work with the less desirable printings of any given card, and we'll leave out the mana base since that will depend on your own collection. Magar isn't included in the cost because it hasn't been released yet, and the pre-release price is pretty high. If you like budget deck techs like these, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like and sub buttons to help the channel grow. Magar of the Magic Strings is a 3/3 Minotaur performer that costs 1 black red. It says pay 1 black red and note the name of target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard and put it onto the battlefield face down. It's a 3/3 creature with, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may create a copy of the card with the noted name. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost, and if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. So this weird guy will animate instances and sorceries from the graveyard, and like a grand puppet master, guide them to the destruction of your opponents. It's similar to cards with Cypher, but instead of encoding on a creature, it becomes a creature itself, and is similar to Flashback since it will exile itself after it's cast again, but if it dies. It's also very important to note that the combat trigger creates a copy of the noted card, and not a copy of a spell that was cast. This means that you can cast those copies without paying the mana cost as if they were in your hand, which means you can also choose new modes for the card if it has any. Things like sacrificing a creature or paying a cost for more modes. I think this will apply to kicker costs also, but let me know in the comments if I'm right or wrong on that one. Since those card copies are cast, say that 3 times fast, that opens up quite a few traditional spellslinger options also. Now, since the spells will only trigger on combat damage, spells that stop opponents from blocking or relying on spells to take out creatures so your creatures can get through won't be as effective, so we need to adjust our strategy accordingly. The first hurdle we need to get over is getting our puppets through our opponent's line of defense. Whisper Silk Cloak and Prowler's Helm are obvious choices to make a single creature unblockable, but since our face-down creatures are colorless, Executioner's Hood will make them only blockable by artifact creatures. Thieves' Tools is nice here since our creatures have 3 power, and the extra treasure will give us a bit of ramp as well. War Cadence will be effective later in the game when we have extra mana to make it very difficult or even impossible for our opponents to block our creatures. Key to the City will let us discard a large spell we won't hardcast and let a single creature be unblockable. If we're desperate, we can pay the 2 to draw a card, but that shouldn't be an issue with our card draw package that we'll get into later. Alpha Brawl will wipe out a single opponent's board of creatures, leaving them wide open for our attack on the following turn. I'm sure you've heard everyone automatically say In Garruk's Wake would be an auto-include in this deck, right? Well, what if you could do what In Garruk's Wake does and get a spell back from your graveyard to cast from your hand again? It'd probably be good enough to earn some kind of totally original Golden Coconut award, don't you think? Volcanic Vision says return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's mana value to each creature your opponents control. Then exile Volcanic Vision. If you make sure to discard this card and not cast it from your hand, it's the copy that will get exiled after it's finished resolving, but your puppet will be able to create another copy and cast it again. Depending on how much mana you have available, you can get a huge spell back into your hand, wipe out your opponent's board, and have a spell ready to punish them for trying to rebuild afterwards. Bothersome Quasit will make our opponent's goaded creatures unable to block, and whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we can goad a target creature. When our opponents attack each other, it should leave them open to attack from our puppets. With this in mind, I included Coronation of Chaos, which makes 3 creatures unable to block and goads them. Spectacular Showdown will let you put a double strike counter on a target creature and then goad it. This option, when copied, will make your puppets able to recast their spells twice in a combat, which can be devastating depending on the spell. But if we cast it for its overload cost, we can put a double strike counter on every creature and goad all of them. If we do this after combat on our turn and avoid attacking, our opponents will destroy each other, and then we can clean up the mess afterwards when they have no creatures to protect them from our puppets. And of course, we'll add Disrupt Decorum, which will goad all of our opponent's creatures. The best option here is also the most expensive card in the deck. Bedlam is an enchantment that says creatures can't block. This includes our creatures as well, so if we put this down, we want to make sure we have lots of puppets that will wreak havoc on our opponents before they run us over. To help with that, we're including plenty of card draw that will pull double duty for each cast. Thrill of Possibility has us discard a card and lets us draw 2 at instant speed, while Faithless Looting does the same thing at sorcery speed. Cathartic Reunion will have us discard 2 cards to draw 3. Big Score and Unexpected Windfall will have us discard a card and draw 2 more, but then it also creates 2 treasures. Pirate's Pillage does the same thing, but at sorcery speed. There are a few more cards that will create treasures like these, and every single one of them acts as ramp if we manage to cast them for free when our puppets connect. Cathartic Pyre will let us discard up to 2 cards and then draw however many we discarded, but we can also choose to deal 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker instead. Risk Factor is fun because it gives the opponent the choice to be dealt 4 damage or let us draw 3 cards. The lower their life total, the better our chances to get 3 fresh cards. Browbeat does the same thing for 5 damage, but any opponent can choose to pay this, which makes it less desirable, but this means that our 3/3 will more often than not deal 8 damage in total, which is not bad. Diabolic Tutor isn't exactly card draw, but it can be a pretty effective tutor if it's allowed to get recast once or twice. Sin Prodder is a win-win. You'll either get a card into your graveyard that you might be able to animate with Magar, or you'll get one right into your hand. If your opponent does send it to the graveyard, they get dealt damage. And finally, we have Invoke Despair. It says target opponent sacrifices a creature. If they can't, they lose 2 life and you draw 2 cards. Then repeat this process for an enchantment and a planeswalker. While this can draw us up to 3 cards, its ability to remove enchantments is the main reason it's here. In order to pay for all these wonderful puppets, we're going to need plenty of mana. Brass's Bounty will give us a treasure for each land we control. Spiteful Repossession says it deals damage to each opponent who controls more lands than you, equal to the difference. Then you create a number of treasure tokens equal to the damage dealt this way. Since Rakdos isn't exactly known for land ramp, it's possible that you'll be able to deal a significant amount of damage and ramping yourself quite a bit at the same time. Imagine how wonderful it will be when you can cast this thing for free. Smashing Success will let us destroy an artifact or land, but if we destroy an artifact, we can create a treasure. Guild will exile a creature and create a gold token, which is a treasure that you don't have to tap to make mana. You can just straight up sacrifice it. Contract Killing will destroy a creature and give us 2 treasures. Inspired Tinkering will have us exile the top 3 cards of our library and then let us play them until the end of our next turn. It will also give us 3 treasures to help us with that task. Warping Wall will counter a sorcery spell. We're mainly keeping an eye out for sorcery speed board wipes, but once we do use it, we can make Eldrazi Scion tokens that we can sacrifice for mana later if we can get through with our puppet and cast it again. And of course, we're splurging on the budget to include Stormkiln Artist. When we're casting copied spells after combat damage has been dealt, making him bigger doesn't really matter, but each spell we copy and cast will create a treasure token. Having access to that much mana will make animating our puppets much easier, and allow us to recover from board wipes that much easier as well, especially since Magar's ability can be activated at instant speed if a board wipe threatens to take out our treasure tokens. With our main game plan set up, how do we plan on winning with this deck? Well, we're just gonna zap our opponents in the face with the copied spells. Electrostatic Field will deal 1 damage to each opponent, Thermo Alchemist and Blister Spit Gremlin will tap to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and untap when we cast a spell. We can get multiple uses out of these creatures' abilities if they're activated and untapped after each copy spell is cast. The Gremlin, however, will untap for any non-creature spell that we cast. Rockslide Sorcerer will deal 1 damage to any target when you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell. Smoldering Egg gets an Ember counter for each instant or sorcery we cast. When it has 7, it transforms into a dragon that will zap any target for 2 damage on each of those casts instead. Pyrehound and Pyroceratops are creatures with trample that will get a 1/1 counter every time we cast a non-creature spell. The trick with these 2 creatures will be whether or not they can make it to your next turn so they can attack. Geist Flame Reservoir gets a counter when we cast an instant or sorcery spell. Then for 1 and 1 red, we can tap and remove any number of counters to deal that much damage to any target. Grapeshot can get pretty crazy if it's cast by a puppet after all other spells have been cast, since its Storm ability will copy the spell for each spell that was cast before it in a turn. Aria of Flame is an enchantment that will give your opponents 10 life when it enters the battlefield. But whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you put a verse counter on it, and then it deals damage equal to the number of verse counters on it to a target player or planeswalker. Copying multiple spells in a combat will deal a significant amount of damage if we're able to get through with our puppets. It only takes 4 spell casts to deal 10 damage. This won't deal damage to our opponents, but Tablet of the Guilds will let us gain 1 life whenever we cast a red or black spell. Because we're casting multiple copies of spells, this should add up to quite a bit of life. And then finally we have the rest of our deck. To deal with enchantments, Enchanter's Bane says at the beginning of your end step, target enchantment deals damage equal to its converted mana cost to its controller unless that player sacrifices it. Debt to the Kami and Farika's Libation will let us choose whether an opponent sacrifices a creature or enchantment they control. Feed the Swarm will let us destroy a target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, but will lose life equal to its mana value. Fiery Confluence will let us choose 3 different or identical options, dealing 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or destroying artifacts. Unexpected Fangs does something special here. At instant speed, we can give a creature both a 1/1 counter and a lifelink counter. Blood Curdle will destroy a target creature and put a menace counter on one of our puppets. Since it lets us place counters on creatures, we can permanently make our puppets bigger lifelink or menace creatures. Dash Hopes is here, but it's going to require a bit of politicking to work. It says when you cast Dash Hopes, any player may pay 5 life. If a player does, counter Dash Hopes. Since this will be cast by a puppet when a bunch of your own spells are being cast, you'll need to target something that you can bait an opponent into paying 5 life to counter. Lightning Reaver doesn't care about us casting spells, but since our creatures should be getting through just fine, it'll have no problem gaining counters to zap all of our opponents. To give us the option to have some blockers, Sedgemoor Witch will make a 1/1 pest every time we cast or copy a spell, and when those creatures die, we'll gain 1 life. Young Pyromancer will make simple 1/1 elementals on each cast, giving us plenty of chump blockers if needed. A Bone Shards acts as another discard outlet and targeted removal. Vraska's Contempt will exile a creature or planeswalker and let us gain 2 life. Bedevil will destroy an artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Unlicensed Disintegration will destroy a target creature, and if we have an artifact, it'll also deal 3 damage to that creature's controller. This shouldn't be a problem with the artifacts we have and the treasures we'll be making. Grave Endeavor says roll 2d10 and choose 1 result. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to that result. Then, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life where X is the other result. Fated Return will let us put a creature from any graveyard onto the battlefield under our control, and also gives it indestructible. Since we'll be copying it on our turn, we'll also usually be able to scry 2 also. Fevered Suspicion will make each opponent exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of those non-land cards without paying their mana costs. And finally, I added Wild Ricochet. It'll let us change the targets of any instant or sorcery and then let us copy it and choose new targets for the copy. Since we can only copy an opponent's spell once and then only the spells our puppets will cast, we can probably find something better suited for our game plan and swap this out for something else. And that's about it for this version of the deck. While building this, I actually stumbled upon another idea for a different version of this deck, and if you're interested, I can share that in a different video. They're basically vampire puppets, which is kind of cool. But once I plugged this deck into TCG Player, the total came to $43.29, including shipping. But again, this is without buying Magar himself. Hopefully, he drops in price before the scarcity of the Unfinity set really kicks in. If you're planning on building Magar of the Magic Strings, do me a favor and let me know what strategy you're rolling with and what you plan on throwing in your deck in the comments below. I'd really like to hear what everyone else is doing with this commander. Mainly because there's so many options to do with this guy. There's so many. It was really hard. I ended up having like 280 cards that I had to whittle this down from, so there are a lot of options. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, and until next time, I'm Space Coconut, and you're welcome.